Most people think they understand the Israel-Palestinian conflict. They think the story is simple. European Jews came to Palestine during the British Mandate. After the Holocaust, they wanted a Jewish state. The United Nations divided the land into two states, one Jewish and one Arab. The Jews accepted the plan. The Arabs rejected it. War followed. Israel survived. Many Arabs fled or were driven out. Their descendants became Palestinian refugees. And today, those refugees want a Palestinian state, while Israel refuses to give them one. That is the bare-bones version many people have in their minds. But it leaves out one of the most important questions. Why are the Palestinians still refugees after more than 70 years? After all, history is full of refugee crises. After the Second World War, millions of ethnic Germans were expelled. They resettled in Germany and over time stopped being treated as refugees. After the Vietnam War, Vietnamese boat people fled. Many were resettled in the United States, Australia, and elsewhere. Their children and grandchildren are not still classified as refugees from Vietnam. Armenians who fled the Ottoman Empire during and after the First World War built new communities across the world. Jews who were forced to flee Arab and Muslim majority countries after 1948 were mostly absorbed by Israel. So why is the Palestinian refugee issue different? Why has it remained unresolved for so long? The common answer is because of Israel. But I think that answer is incomplete. Israel is part of the story, but it is not the whole story. A much bigger part of the story is that the Palestinians were used by Arab governments, failed by their own leaders, and kept in permanent status by international institutions, and influenced by a culture of anti-Jewish hatred that made compromise with a Jewish state almost impossible. Because this conflict is not only about land, it is also about whether large parts of the world can accept Jews as equals. To understand this, we need to go back to the British Mandate. From 1920 to 1947, Palestine was ruled by Britain. During that period, many Jews migrated there, especially from Europe. Some were fleeing persecution. Some were escaping rising anti-Semitism. Later, many were fleeing the horrors that would lead to the Holocaust. Others were motivated by Zionism, the belief that Jews should return to the land of their ancestors and rebuild a national homeland. The British Empire had often allowed migration across its territories. Chinese and Indians migrated to places like Singapore and Malaya. Indians migrated to parts of Africa. People moved across imperial borders for trade, work, and survival. So Jewish migration to Palestine did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a world where empires moved people, borders were changing, and many national movements were emerging. But there was one major difference. Some of these Jews did not only want to live in Palestine, they wanted eventually to create a Jewish state. Many Arabs rejected this completely. In 1947, the newly formed United Nations proposed a partition plan. Areas with significant Jewish populations were allotted to the Jewish state. Other areas were allotted to the Arab state. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan. The Arab side rejected it. When Israel declared independence in 1948, neighboring Arab armies invaded. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and other Arab forces joined the war. Israel survived the attack and ended up controlling more territory than the original UN plan had given it. During that war, hundreds of thousands of Arabs living in Palestine fled or were expelled. Some left because they feared the fighting. Some were driven out by Israeli forces. Some fled because Arab leaders encouraged them to leave. But the Arab side lost, and those refugees did not return. At the same time, Jews living in Arab and Muslim majority countries faced growing hostility. Many Jewish communities had lived in places like Iraq and Egypt for centuries. After 1948, many were expelled, pressured to leave, stripped of property, or made to feel unsafe. Most of them went to Israel, some went elsewhere. One example from Southeast Asian history is David Marshall, Singapore's first chief minister, who came from a Jewish family with roots in the Middle East. So after 1948, there were two refugee movements. Palestinian Arabs left or were driven from what became Israel, and Jews left or were driven from Arab and Muslim majority lands. But there was a major difference in what happened afterward. Jewish refugees were absorbed. Palestinian refugees were kept as refugees, and that difference matters. The most important exception was Jordan. Jordan, formerly Transjordan, controlled the West Bank after the 1948 war and gave citizenship to many Palestinians. In fact, Jordan itself made up most of the territory originally associated with the British Mandate system east of the Jordan River. Its early rulers even claimed a connection to the Palestinian cause and to the lands of the old Mandate. But Jordan's relationship with Palestinian nationalism became dangerous. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, had become extremely powerful inside Jordan. Armed Palestinian groups began operating almost like a state within a state. They challenged King Hussein's authority. This led to the violent conflict known as Black September in 1970. King Hussein's army defeated the PLO and drove it out of Jordan. The PLO then relocated to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, the Palestinian armed presence became one of the factors that destabilized the country and contributed to the Lebanese civil war. Lebanon's civil war had many causes, but the PLO's role was significant. Then there was Kuwait. For decades, Kuwait accepted a large Palestinian population. Many Palestinians worked there, raised families, and built careers. But when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, Yasser Arafat sided with Saddam. Many Kuwaitis saw this as a betrayal. After Saddam was defeated and Kuwait's rulers returned, large numbers of Palestinians were expelled or pressured to leave. Arafat later said, "What Kuwait did to the Palestinian people is worse than what has been done by Israel to Palestinians in the occupied territories." That quote is revealing. It shows that even Arab countries that once welcomed Palestinians came to see them as a political danger. This helps explain why many Arab countries have been reluctant to grant Palestinians full citizenship. Publicly, they speak of brotherhood. Privately, they fear instability. And this is also why Gaza is not only blockaded by Israel. Egypt also controls a border with Gaza, and Egypt has often kept that border tightly restricted. Egypt understands the security risks involved, especially with Hamas and its historical links to the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Palestinian refugee problem continued partly because Arab states did not want to absorb Palestinians permanently. But there is another reason, and this is the one many people avoid. Many Palestinians, and many Arabs more broadly, were not taught to see Jews as equal neighbors with a right to their own state. They were taught to see Jews as enemies. This is where the religious and cultural dimension becomes important. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, in her books Infidel and Nomad, wrote about growing up in a Muslim environment where anti-Semitism was taught from a young age. She described being raised with the idea that Jews were enemies. Later, when she was exposed to the Muslim Brotherhood, those attitudes were reinforced. Her experience matters because it shows that anti-Jewish hatred was not always just political opposition. In some communities, it was taught as part of a religious worldview. If a child grows up hearing that Jews are enemies of God, how can that child easily accept a Jewish state? How can a society that teaches contempt suddenly accept Jewish sovereignty? This is not just about modern politics. Under the Ottoman Empire, Jews and Christians often lived as dhimmis, protected non-Muslim subjects under Muslim rule. But dhimmi status still meant inferiority. They were tolerated, but they were not equal. They often paid special taxes and faced legal disadvantages. That history matters, because Zionism did something revolutionary. It took Jews from being a vulnerable minority and turned them into a sovereign people with an army and a state. For many Jews, this was liberation. For many in the surrounding Arab and Muslim world, it was humiliating and unacceptable. The people who had once been subordinate were now sovereign. The dhimmi now had a state, and not just any state, a state that defeated Arab armies in war. That psychological shock should not be underestimated. This is where the comparison with the American South after the Civil War is useful. For centuries, blacks in the American South were enslaved. Southern whites were taught that blacks were inferior, fit for servitude, and not equal human beings. After the Civil War, slavery was abolished, but the attitudes that supported slavery did not disappear overnight. Many Southern whites could not accept blacks as equals. That mindset continued for nearly a century. The law changed first. The culture changed much more slowly. Something similar can be said about Jews in much of the Middle East. Jews and Christians were not slaves under Islamic rule, and dhimmi status was not the same as slavery. But both systems created a hierarchy. Both taught one group to see another as inferior. Both made equality psychologically difficult for the dominant group to accept. So when Jews established a state, many did not simply see a political rival. They saw an overturning of the old order. They saw people who had once been beneath them now standing as equals, or even defeating them. That is one reason the conflict has been so bitter, and this bitterness has been reinforced by religious texts and interpretations. For example, the Quran contains verses that have often been interpreted in hostile ways. One commonly cited verse is Quran 5:51, O you who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another. Some scholars argue this was revealed in a specific wartime context. Others have used it more broadly to discourage closeness with non-Muslims. But the problem is that in many political and religious movements, the hostile interpretation has been promoted. There are also hadiths that are explicitly violent toward Jews. One of the most notorious is found in Sahih al-Bukhari 29:26. It says, "The hour will not begin until the Muslims fight the Jews, until a Jew hides behind a rock or a tree, and the rock or tree will say, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.'" This hadith has been quoted by extremists and appears in anti-Semitic propaganda, including in Islamist movements. Now, some Muslims will say this refers to an end times prophecy. But whatever the theological debate, the political reality is clear. Such texts have been used to promote hatred. And when religious texts are used to portray Jews as enemies in a cosmic struggle, peace becomes much harder. A territorial dispute can be negotiated. But if people believe that Jews are divinely cursed enemies who must be defeated, then compromise becomes betrayal. This is why the religious element matters. It helps explain why so many peace offers failed. In 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak made a major offer to Yasser Arafat at Camp David. The offer included a Palestinian state in Gaza and most of the West Bank. Arafat rejected it. His defenders argue it was not enough. Critics say he missed a historic chance. There were later negotiations as well, including under Ehud Olmert in 2008. Again, no final agreement was reached. So why did Palestinian leaders keep walking away? One explanation is that they did not want only a state beside Israel. They wanted the defeat, replacement, or eventual disappearance of Israel. This is especially true for groups like Hamas. Its ideology rejects the legitimacy of a Jewish state. Its original charter contains extreme anti-Semitic language. The October 7, 2023 attacks showed where that hatred can lead. Hamas militants committed atrocities that shocked Israel and much of the world. Hatred does not appear overnight. It is taught, it is repeated, it is rewarded, and eventually it becomes normal. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Instead of becoming a peaceful territory, Gaza eventually came under Hamas rule. Since then, Israel has faced rockets, tunnels, kidnappings, and war. That is why many Israelis believe the issue is not just occupation. It is rejection, not rejection of borders, rejection of Jewish sovereignty itself. Now, this does not mean Palestinians have no suffering. They do. Many ordinary Palestinians have lived through war, displacement, and failed leadership. Many children are born into misery they did not choose. But suffering does not automatically make a political cause righteous, and it does not erase the role of hatred, ideology, and bad choices. The Palestinians are still refugees partly because their leaders kept them that way. They are still refugees partly because Arab states often refused to naturalize them, following early policies to prevent their absorption. They are still refugees partly because international institutions allowed refugee status to pass from generation to generation. They are still refugees because the right of return is used not merely as a humanitarian demand, but as a way to undo Israel demographically. That is the essence of the issue. The Palestinian refugee problem is not just a tragedy, it is also a political strategy. It allows leaders to blame Israel for everything while avoiding responsibility, and allows Arab governments to speak of solidarity while refusing equal rights. So when people ask, why are the Palestinians still refugees? We should ask another question. Who benefits from keeping them that way? Palestinian factions benefit from grievance. Arab regimes benefit from a scapegoat. And extremist movements benefit from an eternal enemy. This is why peace has been so hard. Not because land cannot be divided, or compensation cannot be paid, or borders cannot be negotiated. The deeper problem is that too many people have not accepted the basic moral fact that Jews are a people with the same right to live freely in their ancestral homeland. Until that changes, every peace plan will fail. Because peace requires more than signatures. It requires a change in attitude. Just as the American South could not become truly free merely by ending slavery on paper, the Middle East cannot have real peace merely by drawing borders. The old belief in Jewish inferiority has to be confronted. The religiously sanctioned contempt has to be challenged. The teaching of hatred has to stop. And the world must stop pretending that this is only a dispute about land. It is also a dispute about equality. Can Palestinian leaders tell their people the truth? That Israel is not going away? And that the dream of reversing 1948 has only brought disaster? So, to sum up, The Palestinians are still refugees because Arab states refused to absorb them, because their leaders rejected compromise, and because international institutions preserved their status. But beneath all that lies a deeper problem: hatred of Jews, often reinforced by religious belief, historical status, and generations of indoctrination. Because peace begins with a simple idea: the Jew is not a monster, the Jew is not a dhimmi, the Jew is an equal human being. And the Jewish people, like every other people, have the right to live in freedom and defend themselves in their own homeland.